Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Collette Spagnolo, VP of Marketing Analytics here globally at DV. And I would like to start by welcoming everyone to our 2022 Global Insights Report webinar. Our mission at DV is to make digital advertising stronger, safer, and more secure. And transparency and thought leadership are both critical to this mission, which is why we are here today. DV's Global Insights Report provides advertisers with an in-depth market-by-market analysis spanning EMEA, North America, LATAM, and APAC to help inform digital advertising strategies. And this is our 5th anniversary of the Global Insights Report, and our findings have become more robust each year. And this year, our very talented analytics team looked at media quality and performance trends for over 1 trillion impressions delivered across 80 markets and more than 2,100 brands. When I first started working on this annual report back in 2017, the verification market was still nascent. In the beginning, verification primarily focused on protection after transactions took place through blocking and monitoring services. But as programmatic evolved and it became the primary buy type globally, the whole industry's focus turned to protecting advertisers before the media transaction even takes place. And this is commonly referred to as pre-bid avoidance. You'll hear that throughout our discussion today. As that shift occurred, our advertisers have reaped the benefits of these advances in technology, which has improved protection over time, and of course, therefore improved their performance over the years. Another shift that we have seen at a global level is that fraud was one of the biggest concerns in 2017. And while it is still a focus, today we hear from advertisers that they are most concerned about brand safety and suitability and how to measure performance in a cookieless world. This is especially true for our longest standing customers who have a strong baseline of quality already. A trend you'll see throughout our discussion today is that these advanced advertisers have influence on our trends, on our insights, and of course on our benchmarks. And they know how important it is to make the most of their digital investments. Now, today's focus is of course on the EMEA region, which covers more than 50 countries across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I will be taking us through the findings from the report with specific insights from the EMEA region peppered in there. And as we dive into each topic, I'll open up the discussion with our fireside chat panelists, David, Daniel, and Erika, to get their takes on the different trends. As a quick reminder for the audience, a little housekeeping, you can ask questions in the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom throughout the session. And we do have some time set aside at the end for Q&A. So as the session's going, please enter your questions in there. And we'll also be launching some polls throughout the fireside chat to get some audience insights, and we'll be reviewing those results live as well. Before we do all of that, though, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. So David, we can start with you.
Thank you very much, Collette. Hello, everyone. My name is David Goddard. I'm Vice President of Business Development at DoubleVerify, responsible for expanding partnerships with media and technology providers. I've been at DoubleVerify for just over 2.5 years, and prior to joining DoubleVerify, I spent a long time on the publisher side of the fence with a significant stint at the BBC.
Great. Daniel?
Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Knapp. I'm the Chief Economist at IAB Europe. I'm a bit of a participant observer in the industry. I stand on the sidelines, try to analyze what's going on in the market, how structural shifts are happening from cookieless to brand safety, but also how markets are developing, in particular now in a very volatile macroeconomic environment. I've been with the IAB for about 3 years, and before that I was at a company called IHS Markit, where I was leading a team of 60 analysts to look at things from advertising to video on demand to connected cars and so forth.
And I think this is the 2nd year in a row you're joining us for this webinar, Daniel. So thank you for your participation and insights.
Always great to be here.
Thanks. Erika?
Hi, I'm Erika Foster. I'm Director of Standards and Investment Products EMEA at MAGNA Global, which is part of the Media Brands family. I like to introduce myself as mostly an ad tech enthusiast, but I have been in the media for over a decade now, and I started as a programmatic trader and have since moved to senior roles across tech, operations, and strategy. But my current role at Magna really focuses on developing investment products and strategies that are really grounded in brand safety, brand responsibility, and media quality principles.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. We have a really great panel today. I love all of our panelists. So let's jump right into our findings and fireside chat. So we're going to kick off right away with a poll. So I'm asking the audience here, how relevant is fraud for your brand? And that poll will come up in the Zoom box here. I'll give everyone a second to respond. We'll leave this up for the next couple of minutes. But as everyone responds to that, Erika and then David, I would love to know from your perspective, how big of a concern is fraud for the advertisers that you work with? Erika, let's start with you.
Yeah, so fraud still continues to be a primary concern for a lot of our advertisers, and it's particularly a concern when it comes to increasing budgets across programmatic campaigns. And really, I don't think it really comes as a surprise when we see headlines every few months or so showing, new fraud schemes being unveiled, and really eMarketer reports quoting things like global ad fraud costing the industry somewhere between like $100 billion by 2023. But that said, our advertisers are realists. We know it's not all doom and gloom. And we work really closely with them to ensure they're aware of all the technology and best practices we deploy and industry initiatives we support to try to help keep them protected against fraud.
David, on your side, what are we hearing from advertisers?
Yeah, I mean, ad fraud is prolific and continues to grow in sophistication. This is especially true in emerging channels like CTV. Many of the new fraud schemes we saw in 2021 focus on this channel. So we can assume wherever dollars are flowing, and if there is a new evolving technology, fraudsters can try and get a leg up. That's why it's so important that brands are protected throughout the media transaction, from pre-bid to pre-render, or post-bid blocking and monitoring.
Awesome. So getting back to our original audience question, let's see what the audience thinks from a poll perspective. All right, so yeah, I think it's still super relevant, as Erika and David, you both mentioned. 53% of the audience says that they are very concerned about ad fraud. So let's get into the trends. What are we seeing here from that perspective? So overall in EMEA, post-bid fraud declined 22% year over year, but that says more about pre-bid protections in place rather than fraudsters not trying. And while post-bid fraud declined globally, this is a trend that EMEA followed with the global trends overall, we did see a record in fraud schemes this year. They spiked by over 70% year over year from 2020 to 2021. An unprecedented number of schemes targeted connected TV and video, the most complex and sophisticated of which included Octobot, Sneaky Terra, ViperBot, and Smokescreen. You might have heard about some of these in the industry press. And those schemes alone attempted to steal more than $6 to $8 million each month from advertisers, and they're costing publishers too. DV estimates that they may have siphoned $140 million from publishers in 2021. So David, can you speak to what protections specifically are in place that are driving down this post-bid fraud rate, despite fraud schemes constantly popping up? I know you started to reference that in your last answer.
Yes, thank you for that. And there are a couple. The first is pre-bid targeting and avoidance. Some of the SSPs and DSPs have protections built in. In addition, brands can use pre-bid segments to ensure full coverage across site and app fraud, malware, spoofing, and so forth. The second is pre-render solutions. These are solutions that provide additional layer of protection that works in conjunction with the existing controls, such as blocking and pre-bid avoidance. The solutions enables advertisers to further reduce waste and minimize video infractions across devices, including CTV, mobile, and desktop. Video filtering can be used for campaigns that are executed directly via a publisher or through a DSP, and it gets activated once an ad request is received and after bidding takes place. I hope that answered your question.
I sure did. So let's talk about CTV, connected television. So I think there's no industry secret here that there is lower adoption of CTV from an advertising perspective in the EMEA regions versus the US, which is definitely leading the charge. And we see that in our trends and benchmarks as well. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you hear from brands about fraud specifically as it relates to CTV? And then I think more importantly, as an industry, how can we build trust and attract more clients to be comfortable advertising in CTV in the region? And I'll start with you, Daniel, on that one.
I think let's take a step back, really, Collette, and really try to understand what is CTV in the EMEA region. It's, as you said, very, very different from the US. We've got a very different market structure. In Europe, not EMEA, but Europe, at IAB Europe, we currently believe the market to be worth around 1.3, 1.4 billion euros. So completely different numbers here. And it's dominated by broadcasters. It's dominated by BVOD, around 75, 80% of that. And we are in a market which is extremely supply constrained. So there isn't very much supply on CTV. And this lack of supply means that currently brands are often in an experimental stage of tapping into CTV budget, slightly trying to understand how it works, but it isn't this booming industry yet. It still needs to be created. I think, important thing right now is currently, as it comes to fraud, it's mainly a concern around what I'm actually buying, because often CTV is not really declared. What is it? Am I buying a banner overlay? Am I buying something in linear substitutional ads? The intransparency on some of the offerings is sparking concerns about fraud. And the important thing in driving this market is to not bake in fraud detection solutions retrospectively when the market matures, but to do this preemptively in order to ensure that anything related to television, that premium screen and the premium environment in which we advertise in, that remains safe, that main asset of television as an impactful brand medium is being protected in a digital world that, with all its benefits, of course, also comes with rogue and bad actors. And I see this as, in a sense, fundamental, an instrument for market creation. So not to protect a market, but to create a market, we need to start with fraud prevention methods right now.
Right.
And this can also just encourage broadcasters and others to add more supply, so to help reduce these supply constraints that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, I think that is pivotal. And I think we can also leverage some, of our learnings from that market already being a little bit ahead in the US from an ad perspective. Erika, what about you? What are you hearing? How can we build trust in CTV specifically?
Yeah, so whilst fraud has definitely been a consideration of our clients in their decisions to test or not to test CTV, sort of alluding to what Daniel said, another big consideration is just how fragmented the channel is in the region. Unlike the US, we have the added complication of having multiple markets, multiple continents even, languages, and as Daniel said, a lot of broadcast partners as well. So there's such inconsistency in how it's been set up across the region. I think in terms of building that trust, it's definitely, again, as Daniel said, building in those protections from the get-go as opposed to retrospectively trying to build them in. But also from our point of view as an agency, education is definitely the #1 priority. We know that changing consumption habits are seeing a lot of audiences spending more and more time on CTV. And therefore, we need to be educating the clients on what we can do to protect them in the space, because really that's where their campaigns need to be, where those audiences are.
Yeah, super important. Thank you for that. So let's move to brand safety and suitability. So I'd like to start by asking the audience a very similar question. How much of a concern is brand safety and suitability for your brand? So you'll see that poll pop up shortly. And same deal here, we'll leave this up on the screen while we go through the trends in the first question or so. So as everyone answers that, the good news here is that post-bid brand suitability violation rate in EMEA is also falling, similar to fraud. And it's now 9% lower than last year. And the overall rate here is 9.4%. However, it's important to note EMEA is far behind North America and APAC from a brand safety and suitability perspective in terms of post-bid rate. This might be partially because EMEA advertisers serve more on mobile web, long tail inventory, and of course, as you guys have already mentioned, fragmentation, a lot more languages, different markets, etc. But regardless, I think it's important that we all agree the overall trend is positive, right? And advertisers in EMEA, as far as we're seeing, are becoming more mature in their brand safety and suitability performance and their strategies, same as what we're seeing across the whole globe. So David, can you talk about some of the tools in a mature brand safety and suitability toolkit? What do I mean by that? What are the mature advertisers doing on this front?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Well, there are a variety of tools at an advertiser's disposal to help protect their brand and ensure their ad align with content that is appropriate and suitable for their brand. Each serve a different purpose, depending upon brand preference and desire to balance protection with scale. These include inclusion and exclusion lists, category avoidance, which leverages semantic science. And this is where we typically direct clients to ensure dynamic protection that adapts with the evolving news cycle. Mobile app controls, page exceptions, keyword language targeting, and more. The important thing is to be able to understand how each of these should be used so that your brand is protected, but also so that the publisher can continue to produce high quality ad-supported content, something that, due to my prior employer, the BBC, I am quite passionate about. In addition to the controls advertisers have at their disposal, the industry has also taken steps to help advertisers create a common vocabulary, the content that should not be monetized. And actually, Collette, I think you're going to speak on this a bit further.
Yeah, exactly. Brand safety. So in 2019, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, known commonly in industry as GARM, in conjunction with the 4 A's, released the Brand Safety Floor and Suitability Framework. I hope most of you have heard of that. The Brand Safety Floor specifically, as part of that, identifies content that is considered unsafe and never appropriate for monetization. And in DV's brand safety taxonomy, these topics are covered by 5 DV content categories, and you can see them on the screen on the right here. They are phishing, malware, spam, copyright infringement, and extreme and graphic content. And adoption of this brand safety floor has been strong, but it is not consistent across all clients. So here at DV, 93% of our advertisers leverage at least one of these 5 brand safety floor categories, and that's leveraging them for avoidance, blocking, and/or monitoring services. But only 61% use all the floor categories. So Erika, based on this adoption, we see mixed results, right? So are advertisers, from what you're hearing, concerned about funding unsafe sites and apps specifically? And what kind of adoption have you seen across your clients as a result?
Yeah, so I'd say aside from fraud, I do think it's one of our advertisers' biggest fears at the moment. It's a really hot topic. Obviously, we don't want to be seen as funding inappropriate content or being seen in areas that, don't really resonate with your brand values. From an agency holding point of view, we 100% support the adoption of GARM brand safety floor in all instances and encourage our advertisers to do the same. I'd say adoption is pretty good across all our advertisers. And again, going back to that education piece, it's about making sure that a lot of our clients are revisiting their verification tech and ensuring that they have enabled it across all of those categories.
Yeah, that's great. So let's take a look at what the audience has said. Similar to your response, Erika, we see that, the vast majority of respondents in our audience today are very concerned about brand safety and suitability for their brand. So it's definitely a trend that we're seeing consistently, across the whole industry. So let's talk about misinformation and disinformation. We've seen an influx of this that unfortunately seems to surround some of the major news topics and issues in today's ever-evolving news cycle, as multiple of you have already noted. And as an advertiser, I think you want to be sure that you're activating necessary tools like DV's inflammatory news and politics category that we offer for avoidance to specifically avoid that content. Daniel, would love to hear from you about how we, as a broader industry, can work to prevent the monetization of misinformation, disinformation, and the like? And which parties should ultimately take on that responsibility? It's kind of a shared responsibility across the industry, but would love to hear your perspective.
It's a big topic, and it already starts with asking what really is misinformation, what is disinformation. I think it's a great step that you provide this category. However, I think there's a broad challenge with classifying this. While we speak a lot about these terms, there isn't even an academic consensus about what these terms mean. So we have a very shaky foundation from which to work. And the thing is, whenever we want to build scalable systems as an industry that protect advertisers, right, and publishers, we need to encode rules. We need to put rules in place and then build something scalable in this vast digital ad network. The problem is, how can you codify something that is partly subjective and that requires nuance? That's often the case with misinformation, where does it include information that is accidentally factually wrong? Does it include information that might please or displease certain groups of readers or the wider population? These are huge topics. So we're on very shaky grounds here. But then there are, I think, the more extreme categories where it's pretty clear. And we need to understand, of course, as you alluded to, that we're now in a very specific political environment where news are being instrumentalized on a geopolitical stage. And a lot of what these malicious actors are doing is they're taking a playbook from politics. There's a fantastic book called This Is Not Propaganda, which really speaks about how rogue actors, how totalitarian governments are really taking actions from kind of partisan groups and others and applying them also to the online world. As an industry, there are several things we can do, at least I think in the cases where information is where it's clear, right? There are things like what you provided, but there are also other things like trying to understand where are ads running. So take advantage of tools that are available. Take ads, take sellers.json data, match those together to really understand, are the sellers really representing whom they claim to represent, and whom they're eligible to represent? That's something very important. Clean up your supply chain. Think about working with fewer and trustworthy publishers. We're seeing an overall move in the industry towards kind of more like data ethics and data minimization. And these strategies can also help, on top of the tools that you're providing on a strategic level, to ensure that ads are being run in safe spaces and that those publishers who produce their content are being rewarded for it. And lastly, every brand needs to have a clear understanding of what misinformation and disinformation constitutes for them. It might not be something binary. It might be something that needs to be kind of defined on a by brand basis.
A lot of policy questions, right, for individual advertisers and the industry alike. So thank you for your insight on that. More generally, when we take all of this together, looking at fraud, brand safety, suitability, and even NGO, the number of years that a brand has worked with a verification provider like DV typically leads to greater sophistication and understanding of the value of verification tools, and also, right, like a set of policies around definitions of brand safety, suitability, et cetera. And all of this together ultimately results in not only lower violation rates, but also greater campaign quality and, of course, efficiency, which at the end of the day is most important to most advertisers. Now, DV has found that long-standing verification users are most likely to adopt a wider set of verification tools, and that means including preventing fraud and brand safety suitability infractions before an ad is even served. These advanced advertisers saw a 9.4% post-bid violation rate globally in 2021, which is 6% below the global average, but I think more telling, it's 28% below more recent adopters of verification. So Erika, I think David started on this before, but for advertisers that have a more advanced verification strategy, what do you find about their strategies that differ, and how have their strategies maybe evolved over time?
Yeah, so overall strategies tend to differ from client to client, based on their particular priorities. But I would have to say there's generally consistency across a lot of our clients' baseline, protection settings. Some clients will not, place as high importance on viewabilities as others, just purely because they might be a more performance-based client, and therefore viewability is a secondary KPI that they optimize to, whilst other clients, viewability might be, the holy grail for them, and we must hit those KPIs for those campaigns. But I'd have to say that, most of our more advanced clients have really moved away from just looking at those individual quality metrics in isolation, and really look at the overall media quality score of that campaign. And the way they do that is by utilizing tools such as, or metrics such as DoubleVerify's authentic ad impression, which means that they are looking at the overall rate and how much of their campaign was actually viewable, brand safe, in geo, and fraud free, to really understand how that campaign is actually performed. And finally, a lot of them have also started to understand there's a whole toolbox at their disposal, right? It's not just about that post-bid setup of protection, but also pre-bid, and trying to reduce potential of wastage by ensuring they're avoiding any sorts of content which wouldn't match their overall brand safety approach.
And that ensures also that they're not funding anything like misinformation, right? Just to bring it all together. So thanks for that. I think I'd love to talk a little bit about the numbers themselves. So Daniel, despite improvements overall, EMEA is lagging behind North America and APAC, and even LATAM actually this year, in terms of most areas of ad quality. So I'd love to hear your perspective on why you think that is, with your expertise across all the EMEA markets.
Indeed, when it comes to the weather forecast for ad quality, it doesn't look particularly good in your numbers. I think this comes to a multitude of reasons. Number one, of course, the EMEA region is vast. It's extremely heterogeneous. We've got very, very different markets of very different size and maturity in there. That's something to consider. In particular, in emerging markets, which are getting growing extremely quickly in the EMEA region, we're seeing that verification tools are not as adopted as they are in the more mature markets. And we have to think right now, of course, the UK leads the market. The UK leads in size by probably 2.53x over Germany, the next biggest. But then you've got a lot of quick challenger markets moving in. You got Turkey moving in. You got other CE markets moving in quite quickly. And the market growth is often faster than the foundations for sustainable growth. So this is something that is, I think, pretty typical in some of the areas in EMEA. Then the other thing is more on the publisher side. We have a highly fragmented landscape of publishers who are often extremely under pressure in terms of monetization. So apart from the very big ones, if we look at the mid and the long tail, we have a pressure to monetize, an economic pressure to monetize. We don't have many paywalls, etc. And that is also impacting what strategies and resources are being deployed to increase ad quality. So it's both a buy and a sell side issue in a very complex region as well, where if you are a buyer and you're managing different markets that you need different vocabulary, you need local relationships, an understanding of what certain terms and concepts mean in each of those markets. And if EMEA budgets are being run centrally from an EMEA team, that nuance in the local market understanding is often hard to do.
Yeah, I think we see that play out also when we look at our market level benchmarks, which I'll do a quick plug, are also contained in our Global Insights report. So I highly suggest, if you are working across multiple markets, that you look at each market individually and look at our trends there and how they differ, because within the EMEA market, it is very fragmented, and there are different trends happening within subregions. David, how have you seen more advanced verification strategies play out more situationally with clients? I'm thinking, for example, of how various clients responded to the initial COVID crisis, specifically in terms of brand safety and suitability, and what their reactions were. What about more advanced verification strategies?
Question. So if we take COVID as an example, initially when the pandemic broke out, many brands were sensitive about appearing alongside pandemic-related content. So they ended up blocking almost all content related to COVID. However, a lot of that content was neutral or positive. such as news sites speaking about vaccines, advancements, COVID playlists, and health and wellness articles. Initially, the publishers, especially news publishers, were penalized because they could not monetize the content, even though most consumers did not find it objectionable. So when it comes to evolving news cycles, our advice has always been, and the kind of behavior we see from advanced verification strategies is understand what is acceptable to your brand, get to know your toolkit, don't use tools that end up over-blocking or that do not allow for nuance or sentiment, and monitor and adjust when you make changes to your profile to ensure that you're not inadvertently limiting scale.
How about advice for brands who are just starting to embrace verification on the other end of this kind of spectrum? As Daniel already noted, and we've mentioned a few times, with EMEA being such a fragmented overall region, and verification is still very nascent in some brands and some specific markets, I think our audience would appreciate hearing some best practices that you have all experienced from those more advanced brands. So we'll do a round robin for this with everyone, but Erika, let's start with you.
Yeah, so really, I think I would give two pieces of advice. The first being run your own race. I think that's good, advice to use in life generally, but good for verification as well. Whilst it's fantastic, there's so many learnings out there in the industry, so many case studies to help us avoid some of the common pitfalls brands who embraced it earlier on may have been victim to in the past. I don't think you should just turn it on and expect to hit, an 80% viewability benchmark from the get-go. And I think, this particular graph really shows that over time, it's about learning about your brand tolerances. It's about learning what works for you and optimizing to that as well. But at the end of the day, it's you have to approach it like any other part of your digital media. It's crawl, walk, run, and understand what works for you over time. The second is don't set and forget. I think historically verification has really been a sort of box ticking exercise, and most of the most advanced brands that we work with at Magna's understand that they need to work together with us, the agency, as well as the verification provider, right? To continually visit that data and please look at the data. I think that's a real important piece of advice. If you set it up, look at what you're reporting against your campaigns, and work with that verification provider to understand, is there any new tech that they're working on? Are there any new betas that we could test against? Because it doesn't stand still. The industry doesn't stand still, so you should move with it as it progresses.
I'm extremely biased on multiple fronts here, but I totally agree. Please look at the data, right? I mean, getting the most out of your verification provider is also super important, right? Don't pay for something that you set and forget. It's not going to lead to added value over time, and you're not going to see this kind of progression over time. Daniel, what about on your side? Any advice specifically for the newer brands or newer to verification audience?
I think Erika really gave the two main pieces of advice that people should start with. I would add this: don't be ruled by fear. Don't start by over-blocking or see this as a topic that is scary. Try to lean into that topic. Try to explore it. Don't be ruled by fear. Don't try to think about it like securing your home with security cameras. It's a very different approach in media. It needs different mentality. And the other thing I would say is experiment and learn. And that also means monitor, apart from speaking to your provider, monitor the news cycle. Maybe, back to David's point earlier, when you see that the connotation of a certain term, a concept, or something is changing in public perception, reflect that in your brand safety approaches as well. Don't think of the concept, what's good or what's not so good, as static. Try to embed the real world, the social, the cultural context, which is changing. Try to embed and encode that in your approach.
And again, that might look very different market by market, right? You need to have a very specific approach depending on where you're running, and that includes geolocation, but also even specific publishers, right? David, what about you? I know you have some very practical, tactical approaches and best practices that you can share.
Yeah, kind of a few, it's building on what everyone said, kind of like what Erika said with Don't Send and Forget, like develop and document brand safety and suitability parameters, including governance and policies and controls that ensure streamlined and consistent execution across all media buys. So number one. 2, leverage pre-bid, pre-serve and post-bid technology to ensure protection throughout media transaction. And do this across everything. So implement verification strategies across all buying platforms, including walled gardens like social media, and even new and emerging channels such as CTV.
So we'll get to that on viewability in just a second. But first, let's talk about overall viewability trends. So we've seen more than 5 years of a trend of improvement. This has made my life a little interesting, or maybe not as interesting, because it is such a consistent trend over time since I started at DV in 2015. And in 2017, when we first launched our Global Insights report, it was already more than a decade after the industry was first introduced to the concept of viewability. But at the time, still only just over 50% of ads were viewable. Today, video viewability is exceeding the recommended IAB threshold of 70%, and display is inching closer and closer.
Has Collette frozen?
She's frozen for me.
Yes.
Awesome. No worries. We'll give her a minute to come back. But there's some really interesting insights here with regards to viewability. And I think we'll let Collette come back, but I think one of the things we were going to jump to is with regards to like how advertisers should think about viewability or newer channels like CTV. And we were coming on to the next phase of this, and when Colette's back, we'll jump into this a little bit more, but it's really interesting what we're seeing in CTV at the moment, because we're still in the early stages of defining what viewability means in CTV. And if we will be held to the same standard, even if it will be held to the same standards as digital video. And that is why we're kind of active members, we being DoubleVerify, of the Open Measurement Working Group, a group that is looking to document such standards and help ensure transparency on this growing channel. Ahead of the release of such standards, we've actually developed solutions that provide insights that are valuable to advertisers, like fully on-screen signals, and signals that communicate if TVs fall off, or the TV is off with regards to that. And actually what we found is 1 in 4 top environments, which is app plus device in the CTV space, keep playing the video and recording impressions after the TV is turned off. I mean, just slightly while we wait for Collette to jump back on, we've seen the impact of standardization across many medias, and the impact of success metrics and also performance metrics such as this. How important is having standardization, or even the kind of ability to measure CTV in this ecosystem and see the growth of CTV? I mean, Daniel, as you said earlier on, we were lagging behind in investment in CTV in Europe. What's your thoughts on that?
I think overall, when we look at these trends here, this is encouraging. And I think overall video, if we abstract a little bit and say CTV, you know, it's broader than CTV. We look at overall video now. It's around, video is around 40% of display spend in most European markets. So a lot of money is going in that channel. And as budgets are so high in video, also advertiser standards have increased as to what am I really getting for that money. It's such a big budget pool right now that even smaller pockets where things are not viewable are actually impacting budgets or the efficiency of budgets significantly. But what's also the case is we're seeing, in particular on premium inventory sources now, a lot of ad clutter being removed, where we're seeing a shift towards fewer and better ad units. And this is also helping just on the way that ad experiences are being designed, that viewability rates are going up. There's still, of course, those publishers who try to stuff their pages with as many integrations as possible. And what I'm finding is that in those environments, viewability is much harder to achieve just because of the volume of ad units, but also the amount of vendors you've plugged in. I think that is also something to consider.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've been talking about viewability, but actually we're going to be jumping into kind of our next section, which is all about attention, which is interesting in itself. I think we're going to be launching a poll now to see what kinds of metrics our audience are using to optimize their campaign. So maybe we can launch that poll. Look at that on screen, on cue. Thank you very much. So which are the metrics that you're using to optimize this campaign performance? Time in view, quartile completion, ad interactions, and share of screen. So while we wait for our audience to jump into this, I've stalled long enough because Collette is back and we are launched the poll, Collette. So all good.
Okay, good. Well, it's been 2 years and my internet has not learned how to stabilize. So of course that happens in the middle of a webinar. So sorry for that. Great. So while we are going through that poll, our next section is about attention. So let's talk about viewability solutions. They've helped advertisers optimize towards placements that have a high likelihood of being seen. And high viewability rates are important, but viewability only lets an advertiser know that a user had a chance to view their ad. It does not measure impact. And that's been the definition since the IAB first defined viewability more than 10 years ago. And now that advertisers with a very solid verification strategy are hitting high viewable rates, they can begin looking at new measures like attention to gauge performance and drive outcomes. So now that there's a path to maintaining quality, the next natural purview of measurement is performance. And given the increasing scrutiny on privacy-friendly solutions, anything that's measured must respect consumer privacy. And that's where contextual targeting and attention metrics will play a strong role in media planning going forward. And beyond viewability, attention metrics can capture that elusive moment where consumers are intrigued by a product or brand, they're motivated to engage, and ultimately what we all want, they're driven to convert. And in a world where consumers see upwards of 10,000 ads per day, measuring attention can provide powerful insights into which ads are most likely to perform. So David, in your experience, what do brands and advertisers think attention means? And I'd be remiss if I didn't also ask how DV defines it.
Yes, thank you very much, Collette. Well, I think everyone understands the meaning of attention, but many clients are trying to understand how attention can link to improving cost per acquisition or brand uplift. But the key to enabling attention is linked to the next question. What is the best way to measure attention? Now, in 2021, DoubleVerify launched Authentic Attention. DV Authentic Attention evaluates over 50 data points of the exposure of a digital ad and the consumer's engagement with a digital ad and device in real time across both display and video ads. So exposure, which is measurement of ad presentation, such as viewable time, share of screen, and quartile completions, and engagement, which is the measure of the user interaction at the device ad level, for example, device or ad touch, video playback events. Now, DV Authentic Attention makes it easy to understand how key campaign attributes, placement, sites, app, creative, etc., compare to all DV impressions, immediately identifying optimization opportunities.
Great. So I think we're at our final fireside chat question, actually. So this will also be a question for all three of you. You know, it took some time for the industry to adopt viewability and then also, of course, to transact on it as a table stakes metric. So would love to hear from each of you. What are your thoughts on attention measurement as a future currency? And Erika, we can start with you.
Yeah, so I do think there's a lot of chat in the industry about, attention. I think I attended Adweek just a few weeks ago, and I would have to say that every other session there was some sort of mention of attention and its future in terms of digital buys. And I do think it is the next logical step when it comes to looking at the quality and effectiveness of media digital buys. But I do think we are still in the early days on this one. And I think for it to become, a core factor of media qualification, the measurement needs to be standardized within the industry as a whole. But I do think it is the future. I think it's worth exploring now. I think it's worth looking at products like, authentic attention or any other attention products as well, just to understand how clients can incorporate it in the future and think about it in terms of their overall digital measurement framework. I don't think it's going to take as long as viewability took. I think we kind of got over that original hump of looking at viewability. We're a little bit more flexible as an industry, and I do think we're hungry to innovate, especially now at this moment of time where, privacy issues are a hot topic. Cookie deprecation is a hot topic. So looking at measurement like attention will definitely be an alternative we should be exploring.
Daniel, do you agree?
I think attention, i.e. the quality and depth of engagement with an ad should have preoccupied us much earlier as an industry. But I think many, self-critically drank the Mexico Kool-Aid of the latest new techs and other things. And I think it really causally took that shake up of the industry through the privacy-first solutions, the deprecation of cookies, that the industry actually had the headspace to shift on that topic. They should have done it much earlier, but it was that moment that really drove it, because we now need to see how else do we measure. And there is, I think, a renewed sense that we need to look now more at the quality of media. As Erika said, many partnerships going on that have been holding companies, tech firms in that space. But it's extremely early. Often attention measurement is still kind of panel or kind of eye tracking based. There are many different approaches, and for currency, one thing is missing, and it's typical for everything happening in ad tech, which is a new hot topic comes out, and then everybody is building proprietary solutions. New solutions are mushrooming out, and then these solutions are trying to compete against each other for a standard. So we need to much earlier on find this industry consensus of what attention is and how we measure it, to avoid the confusion of different products with their own proprietary truths of what attention is, competing against each other and making it hard to navigate attention.
And I can just build on that, Daniel, as well. And I think I can build on both those questions. I agree. We are a little way off from having authentic attention as a currency, but those clients using attention measurement and seeing the attention measurement impact other KPIs, such as improving cost per acquisition and brand uplift, will start adopting attention as a form of currency. And I believe we will see clients and advertisers optimizing towards attention, both in environments and domains with higher attention, and also maybe using attention as part of developing creative optimization as well, because it's not just the environment that impacts the attention. You need that catch line. But again, I kind of agree with you all in a sense of it may take time. I mean, look at viewability as an example. As Collette mentioned, it actually took a couple of years for viewability to catch on as a form of currency, which seems really strange to us now. But all in all, I think attention will be a future currency option once we're in that post third-party cookie era.
Great. Thank you all for your insights and for your patience with my Wi-Fi. So we have a few minutes to get into some of the Q&A that have been rolling in. So I'm going to take a look here. The first question is about CTV in EMEA specifically. So the question is, how much is fraud an issue in buying programmatically versus buying directly? And I can start that, and then anyone else, if you want to chime in. I know that from a stats perspective, we do see higher fraud rates in the programmatic environment for CTV, which I think is no surprise because it's more of an open environment where fraudsters can kind of take advantage of higher CPMs. But we'd love to hear from any of you, maybe David, on specifically, what you're hearing from clients when it comes to programmatic versus buying direct partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely. So also as a former publisher, there is, I've been on the receiving end of this, but there is a higher risk to fraud in a programmatic environment. So even buying with a publisher direct is, and building those partnerships for premium quality CTV inventory is a safer and more secure way to acquire media and avoid the higher percentage of fraud. It doesn't mean you're completely fraud-free just by doing that, because publishers can be the victims of fraud as well. However, there is a lower percentage there. But I know we've done some studies at DoubleVerify. I'm pretty sure some of this is out there. That actually, if you're buying programmatically and you apply the protections available to you, like pre-bid avoidance and also post-bid blocking or pre-render, that have to be pre-bid filtering in the CTV environment, you can actually reduce the impact of fraud on your campaign down to levels of buying in a high quality premium environment. Thus, if you want to buy programmatically and use protections available to you, you can really improve the quality of your inventory and feel confident that you can invest CTV both with direct relationships with publishers and through programmatic channels.
Great, thank you for adding on to that. We have an audience question about, can you share examples of how fully optimized brand suitability, inclusive approach alongside exclusion, and responsible media activation translates to improved effectiveness per impression? So I don't know, Erika, if you have any examples offhand or a more general response to that, or if anyone else wants to join in.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't share specific examples. Obviously, this is my client's sort of secret sauce, but there's definitely overall a sort of movement and of approach of how Magna and how IPG media brands is moving away from just looking at just brand suitability, but also as the audience member mentioned, sort of an inclusive approach and responsible media. We published something called the Media Responsibility Principles back in 2020. And as part of that, we are really looking at the investment partners that we work with, vetting them against those principles to make sure that we are investing in partners that meet our responsibility criteria. In terms of improved effectiveness per impression, we have definitely seen how being able to support these partners that meet our sort of responsibility criteria has translated to an overall more effective campaign. But yeah, in terms of the specifics, can't really share there, but it is part of how we're evolving our approach over time.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing. The next question's off of the attention section. So are there some attention metrics that you feel are more important than others in driving outcomes? Daniel, I don't know if you've done any research on this at the IAB, but maybe you have a perspective here.
We haven't yet, so but we are about to launch a kind of white paper and a working group on attention, where we are going to explore those things. And I think it's a very good question, because similar to misinformation, disinformation, now in a positive sense, how do different vendors define attention, and also what are the best signals to collect, right? Also, how often do you need to do it, right? Should you use a panel-based eye tracking? Can you infer attention based on viewability and other signals in a live, more scaled environment? I think those are some of the questions that need to be explored. And then also, once you determine, of course, what attention is, and also coming back to the previous question, what is the value of the attention? So do you just measure attention, or do you measure some kind of return on attention? So these are all questions being discussed currently. Again, early days, but at the IAB, we want to provide a forum to exactly explore that, but in a really kind of rigorous and empirical way.
Great, thank you for sharing. And a huge thanks to David, Erika, and Daniel for overall a fantastic discussion. I hope that everyone in the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. If you have not read our Global Insights report yet, you can download it from the doubleverify.com website. So I strongly encourage that you check it out. There are a lot of insights, benchmarks, and additional trends that we didn't get to today. So please go ahead and download that. A quick note, this session has been recorded and it will be available for viewing at a later date. So feel free to share this also with colleagues of yours, if they were unable to make it today. So thank you again, David, Erika, Daniel, a real pleasure.
Pleasure.